This is why getting an organ transplant was the worst decision of my life. I disconnected the call, gazing into my wife's eyes with the broadest grin I had ever worn. My delight seemed endless, and her inquisitive voice broke through my shock. "John, what did they say?" she queried. Still reeling, I let relief wash over me, surpassing even the initial joy. "They located a match," I stammered. My wife, Sarah, surged forward, wrapping her arms around my neck. In response, I placed a gentle hand on her back. The search was over, and a compatible kidney had been found. After half a year of languishing, battling my deteriorating health and fervently praying for a suitable kidney donor, my perseverance had paid off. This newfound elation almost rivaled the happiness I had felt on our wedding day. The phone call that had just transpired stood as one of the most euphoric moments of my existence. At least, that's how I initially perceived it. Unbeknownst to me, the gates of darkness were about to swing open, forever altering the trajectory of my life. You might expect a narrative that unfolds into tales of failed transplant procedures, or perhaps even a grisly account of being inadvertently conscious during a surgical operation. Oh, how I wished for such straightforward hardships. They would have been less convoluted, swifter, and certainly less agonizing. Heck, even the grim prospect of a transplant gone awry would have seemed preferable. In that scenario, I might have clung to life for a handful of additional months. Death, in comparison, would have felt like merciful release. However, what I encountered was entirely different, a series of genuine, bone-chilling nightmares. The nightmares commenced shortly after my release from the hospital. Initially, they began as fleeting images in my dreams. Random fragments emerged, a distressed woman clutching her infant in the corner, a floor drenched in blood, a man bellowing with lunatic laughter, knife blades being honed, and for an instant, the sight of a man immobilized in a chair, his mouth sealed shut with black tape, his eyes bulging in sheer terror as he bore witness to an abhorrent murder. These visions were disjointed, devoid of any coherent narrative. They manifested as mere glimpses, isolated like the slides of a chaotic, vivid slideshow. Nonetheless, they held a disconcerting clarity. I could vividly depict the woman's visage, every detail of her attire. The shrill pitch of her terrified screams echoed in my ears. The scene of bloodshed, the tortured man in the chair, the metallic tang of iron wafting from the gore. They were all as vivid as real-life memories. I confided in Sarah about these nightmares. She attempted to assuage my distress, attributing them to residual effects of anesthesia or the natural recovery process after surgery. "Anesthesia still in your system, perhaps?" she hypothesized. "Or maybe it's just your body's way of recuperating. After all, you went through quite an ordeal. And remember, you've always harbored an aversion to doctors, stemming from your white coat syndrome." A feeble nod from me and her calming smile seemed to quell my burgeoning unease. Sarah possessed an innate ability to placate my anxieties, no matter how overwhelming they might be. "What else could it be?" she'd inquire, her voice imbued with a reassuring tenderness. Despite her consoling words, an unsettling sensation lingered within me. Despite my attempts to dismiss it, an inexplicable disquiet lingered beneath the surface, a sense of impending doom. My resolve to cast aside these distressing dreams wavered as the nights wore on. Instead of abating, they intensified. No longer confined to a single chilling scene, my dreams now presented an array of nightmarish scenarios. A man, around 30, with long black hair, dangled perilously from a bridge by a single finger, his anguished pleas resonating. Another vision unfolded within a barn where a family, restrained in lawn chairs, succumbed to the engulfing flames. And then an image etched itself into my mind. A woman held at gunpoint, her partner coercing her to witness his self-inflicted demise. As ghastly as these scenarios were, they all bore striking similarities. Amid the violence and dread, a man's unhinged laughter persisted, coupled with the recurring presence of the immobilized man in the chair, his appearance evolving subtly from one dream to another. The terror-stricken figure seemed to be deteriorating, his physique becoming gaunter and more weathered with each iteration. Weeks elapsed, and the nightly onslaught of horrors showed no signs of relenting. Frustration grew between Sarah and me, culminating in arguments. She advocated for therapy and the medications prescribed by the psychiatrist, while I vehemently rejected the idea. "It's not just anxiety," I exclaimed during one heated exchange, "and it's not the result of horror movies either. I've watched horror my whole life without these dreams." "Then what do you suggest?" she retorted. Exhausted and at a loss, I buried my head in my hands, fighting the urge to weep. I don't know, but I can't keep living like this. Sleep has become an unattainable refuge. Her pragmatic response pierced my desperation. Shouldn't you consider seeing a therapist? Your insurance covers it. Don't you want to find relief from this torment? Sighing, I acquiesced. I held strong reservations about therapists, dismissing them as conduits for cliched explorations of my childhood. Yet what other recourse did I possess? The vivid, morbid imagery had insidiously crept into my waking thoughts, a perpetual mental torture. All right, I relented. I'll start looking for a therapist. Locating a psychiatrist wasn't a daunting task, given the burgeoning demand for mental health services. My insurance led me to a slender woman in her 30s, her demeanor exuding a sense of professionalism and empathy. In her office, I recounted the nightmarish chronicles that had beset me post-surgery. I detailed the clarity with which I perceived the horrors, an experience at odds with any prior dreams. She posed the usual inquiries, delving into my past experiences, medical history, and any concurrent medications. Despite her attentive demeanor, her conclusions appeared nebulous. She hypothesized that my brain might be grappling with the trauma of facing impending death while grappling with kidney failure. According to her, surviving such prolonged psychological duress might manifest as a kind of PTSD, triggered now that the specter of death had receded. Skepticism tinged my thoughts, but I accepted her prescription for anxiety and sleep medication. Sleep seemed the most desirable outcome, even if it required pharmacological intervention. To my dismay, the prescribed medications proved ineffectual, even exacerbating the horrors that besieged my nights. The dreams escalated in frequency and gruesome detail. New scenarios unfurled before me. A man compelled to consume something raw, an unsettlingly graphic image of a figure thrust into a wood chipper. Yet an unyielding thread connected them all. The relentless laughter of a man lurking nearby, the tethered man forced to witness the grisly spectacles. Futile attempts to escape the nightmare's clutches drove me to despair. Nights that previously promised rest now ensnared me in terror, granting me no reprieve. Even daytime respite remained elusive as the haunting images etched themselves into my conscious mind. My wife's insistence on therapy and medications irked me, exacerbating my frustration. I deemed the psychiatrist's diagnosis schizophrenia an incomplete assessment, for these experiences transcended textbook definitions. Desperate for answers, I decided to trace the enigma back to its origins, the kidney transplant. Despite my uncertainty, this trail was the sole path I had left to follow. Obscure as it seemed, it was a shard of a connection. Determination propelled me onward, even though I lacked any semblance of direction. How could a kidney transplant harbor the source of these nightmarish visions? It was a riddle I was determined to solve. A maelstrom of questions swirled within me. Had I absorbed some gruesome news story during my unconscious state in the hospital? Were murder victims being treated simultaneously, their agonies seeping into my subconscious? Hours of inquiry yielded no answers. Frustrated yet undeterred, I reached out to the surgeon who had performed the transplant. My intent was clear. I wanted to know the origin of the kidney, a query beyond the surgeon's usual duties. At first, he resisted my entreaty, prompting me to fabricate a tale of gratitude toward the donor's family. After a prolonged discourse, he sent me a list resembling serial numbers. He indicated the number that corresponded to my kidney and provided me with the contact information for the doctor overseeing organ donations, the one responsible for the extraction. My subsequent communication with this doctor was laden with a similar narrative, but the response sent shivers down my spine. The donor's name was Samuel Horn. Samuel Horn. His name struck me with an inexplicable familiarity. Swift internet research unraveled the mystery. Samuel Horn was a fellow Boston resident. He was an investigator who had vanished 2 years prior, a case left unsolved until his corpse was discovered on the city's outskirts. Death had claimed him by means of a single fatal stab wound. A mixture of sorrow and eerie recognition swept over me. I recognized his face, the man bound in each nightmarish vision, witness to countless atrocities. Tensions mounted as I confronted an enigma too chilling to articulate to my wife. How could I communicate that the kidney within me carried with it an enigmatic darkness, a legacy of unspeakable horror? Anxious days drifted by. plagued by uncertainty and trepidation. How could I make my wife understand? My mind wandered through an array of improbable scenarios. Honey, the kidney I received is haunted by an investigator's spirit, compelled to witness his final memories. I'm haunted by the grotesque images of his experiences. Such an admission seemed ludicrous. Ultimately, I was driven by a visceral conviction that Samuel Horn intended me to bear witness to his nightmares, to bring his torment to an end. Why else would these visions plague me? As the weeks progressed, the dream's intensity showed no sign of relenting. Scenes of violence and dread continued to assail me, each more vivid and harrowing than the last. An elusive figure laughed maniacally in the periphery of these visions, while the immobilized man's image became more emaciated and frail with each recurrence. Sleep-deprived and tormented, I sought solace in therapy. My wife's encouragement prevailed, leading me to seek professional guidance once more. Sessions offered a fragile sanctuary from the relentless horrors, but the solution remained elusive. Despite my willingness to engage, my desperation only deepened. A revelation from the authorities shattered my fragile equilibrium. The officer disclosed a truth I had never known. I was adopted. My biological parents had surrendered me for adoption when I was a mere 4 months old. This revelation, amidst the storm of my nightly ordeals, was a jolt to my already overwhelmed senses. In the midst of this turmoil, a crucial truth emerged. Samuel Horn was not merely an investigator from my nightmares. He was my twin brother, the one I had never known existed, the one whose legacy of darkness was now interwoven with my own. This revelation, both terrifying and mystifying, threatened to plunge me into deeper despair. The revelation left me spiraling in uncertainty. The torment that Samuel had endured in life, the horrors he had been subjected to and ultimately succumbed to, were etched within me. My nights remained engulfed in a cascade of nightmarish visions, and my days were consumed by the realization that I was living the aftermath of his suffering. My thoughts, my very being, had become a vessel for his pain, his terror, his unquenchable thirst for justice. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred. My desperate plea for sleep was no longer met with respite. My sanity teetered on the edge, and the uncertainty of whether I was living my life or reliving his plagued every moment. It was an existence that defied explanation, an unsettling confluence of fate and horror that I was now irrevocably entwined with. And so I share this tale, not as a confession, but as a testament to the unfathomable darkness that can reside within us. To those who listen, understand that the line between our waking lives and the horrors that haunt our dreams is tenuous at best. The legacy of Samuel Horn, my twin brother, serves as a reminder that even the most horrifying nightmares can have their origins in the tangible realm. In the end, the only certainty is that our lives are woven with threads of unimaginable darkness, waiting to unravel when least expected. This is why I believe there are dead animals in my walls. It all began when I found myself the proud owner of a historical house in the quaint town of Redbrook. This town, a serene retreat from the frenetic pace of city life, was the perfect location for my new home. The house itself was a marvel, a grand 2-story Victorian with turrets, a wraparound porch, and a price tag that defied reason. My realtor had dropped cryptic hints about its mysterious past, but I brushed off her insinuations. To me, a house was simply a house. The day I moved in, a chill wind carried a distinct scent of decay that hung in the air. Given the season, I dismissed it as the fragrance of decomposing leaves. The movers murmured about an odd smell inside, but I dismissed it as mere grumbling, thinking they were eager to finish early. Yet as days melted into nights, the odor intensified, its intensity waxing and waning like a breathing entity. It was foul, reminiscent of rotting flesh, a stench I deemed impossible. My friends made light-hearted jests, suggesting that perhaps there were unfortunate critters trapped within the walls. Driven by a determination to resolve the mystery, I embarked on a thorough investigation of every nook and cranny in the house. Alas, my search yielded no tangible answers. But the walls, they seemed to possess an eerie vitality of their own. Nights turned into an ordeal, as the house filled with peculiar sounds, faint whispers, and at times even muffled cries. Then on a particularly windy evening, the walls emitted an unfamiliar scratching sound. It was so close that it sent shivers down my spine. My curiosity piqued, I pressed my ear against the cool wallpaper, only for the noise to grow louder. It was rhythmic, akin to a coded message. Scritch, scratch, scritch. Overwhelmed by curiosity, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Armed with a crowbar the following morning, I mustered the courage to tear down the wall from which the sounds emanated. With each forceful swing, a small hole emerged, releasing a cascade of old newspapers and insulation. And then, in a chilling twist, a skeletal paw tumbled onto the floor. The shock rippled through me and I recoiled. Summoning my courage, I widened the breach. Layer after layer of plaster and wood crumbled, revealing a grotesque tableau. The wall was lined with the remains of animals, cats, birds, rodents, each seemingly entombed in a ritualistic manner alongside old newspaper clippings spanning decades. The oldest date I could discern was from the late 1800s. The revelation stirred within me an unsettling question. What kind of malevolent entity had dwelled here before me? My quest for answers plunged me into a frenzy of research. I discovered that the house's previous owner was a recluse named Albert Krein, rumored to be a warlock by the locals. Legend held that he captured stray animals, viewing them as vessels for sinister spirits. By sealing them within the walls, he believed he was shielding the world from malevolent forces. However, an even more disturbing truth emerged. The skeletal amalgamation of animals was not merely a product of my nightmares, it was a sinister reflection of reality. A local missing persons case had caught my eye. A 10-year-old boy named Tommy had disappeared, his last known whereabouts near my property. The chilling detail? The article was dated just 2 weeks before I had moved in. Unnerved by the realization that I might be living amidst a contemporary nightmare, I summoned the police. Sniffer dogs combed the area in search of any trace of Tommy, but the passage of time had seemingly erased his presence. While days turned into nights, the haunting escalated, whispers growing louder and the chilling specter of the amalgamated creature visiting me with disturbing regularity. It was becoming evident that Tommy's fate was bound to this twisted legacy. Guided by Mrs. Whitman, an elder who had become my steadfast ally in unraveling this enigma, I began to grasp the truth. The entity formed by the amalgamated spirits was not just a cacophony of voices. It was a barrier protecting me from a force even more nefarious. Mrs. Whitman explained that her family had guarded an ancient ritual, and the ashes of these spirits could serve as a shield against their malevolence. With her guidance, I respectfully cremated the remains of the trapped animals, creating a protective barrier using their ashes. Chanting in an unfamiliar language, Mrs. Whitman battled the unseen forces that sought to maintain their dominion. Hours passed as the struggle between the living and the spectral raged on, until finally, silence fell like a shroud. The malevolent forces were subdued, but for how long? Exhausted but hopeful, Mrs. Whitman turned to me. "The barrier will hold for now," she murmured, "but you must find Tommy. He is the key to ending this darkness." I persisted in my search, combing every corner of the property. Just as my resolve began to waver, I stumbled upon a concealed basement door beneath a worn-out rug. Though locked, my determination overpowered any hesitation, and I forced the door open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay, and the dim light revealed chains and ancient talismans suspended from the ceiling. At the center stood a small cage, within which a frail figure was trapped. Tommy, alive but frail, his eyes wide with terror. I freed him and immediately called the police. In the days that followed, their investigation unearthed a chilling discovery. The house had borne witness to an array of disappearances over the years, not confined to animals alone. It became clear that I had unwittingly become the steward of a house that concealed unspeakable horrors. With Tommy's rescue and the spirit's appeasement, the malevolent hauntings ceased. The house, once a prison for tormented souls, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Months later, I chose to sell the property with full disclosure of its dark history, ensuring that it would be transformed into a memorial site to honor those who had suffered. Tommy's recovery was heartening, yet Redbrook would forever carry the weight of its encounter with the malevolent forces that had once held it captive. As for me, the experience left an indelible mark. Though I had emerged from the clutches of a malevolent history, the memories remained etched in my psyche. But I found solace in the knowledge that I had played a pivotal role in the battle between light and darkness. and for the moment the shadows had been held at bay.